In Admin Lesson 4, we're going to cover off the Customization tab of TrackerRMS. So if we click on Tools in the system, and if we look at the Customization tab, this is where you have a number of different things you can do in the system. So the first thing we're going to look at is how to create custom fields and link them to records. So you're going to see two different options. So the first one is custom field lists. So if any of the custom fields you're building is a list type, you would want to build out that specific drop-down list here. Custom fields is where you're going to build the field and tag them in. So here, this is where we can go in and we can build a new custom field on the system. So let's say we wanted to create a custom field against the candidate and we wanted it to be called ranking. This is where you can create a field. You can pick where you want that associated to. So it can be associated to all of the different types of records in the system. You can also go down and pick the type of custom field that it is. So in here you can have a yes, no field. You can have it be a list where you can pick from a list, a multi-list where you can pick multiple options, a value, which is just a blank or a free text field, a number field, which will let you put in a numerical value, a multi-line or kind of a big notes field, a date field, an image, an HTML field, a file link, a hyperlink, and then all of the records will let you link to a specific record itself. So for this particular one, if we were wanting it to be a ranking, this particular type, we would want to build out a list first. So this is where if we go back into Tools, you can go into the custom field lists, and if you're picking a list type, you just want to build out that list first. So here, we're going to build one, and we're going to say ranking. And this is where you could say, very good, good, okay, not good, and bad. So you could put something like this where you're building out the options. Now here, you'll notice if you are on a row down beneath and it doesn't have text, if you try to hit save and close here, it will give you an error. So you just need to make sure that your cursor is in the last row. If we hit save and close, that's going to populate that list out. When we hit refresh, we'll be able to see that list. And now that list is ready to go to tag against the candidate. So now if we go back into the Tools section, this is where we could now build out our custom field. And if we're picking a list type, you'll always want to build that list out first. So now if we call it ranking, and we want to tag it to the candidate record, we can go into the custom field type, and we can say I want this to be a list. And I'm going to grab my ranking list, which is all of those are going to be populated out there. The custom field block lets you pick whether you want it to go into the primary or the secondary block. There's two different parts in the layout designer where you can put it. The top box allows you to say, do I want it visible in the main custom field block? And then the bottom one will allow you to pick whether you want it viewable in the preview way. So the top one, what this is an example is if this is a field that down the road you're not using anymore, but you still want to retain the data, you could uncheck it so it wouldn't be visible, but you could still have reports or you could still run information off of it in the background. So if we hit save and close, that's going to build that field. So now if we go back into a candidate record, you'll see that if we go down to the custom field section, we now have our ranking field that's a multiple choice where I can go in, select the value, hit save, and it will retain that value. So that's how you can build a list type of field. Now let's go in and look at building an additional custom field. So if we wanted to go in and build a yes/no, this is where we could say, all right, let's build one, and I want to call it, open to relocation. So if there's any fields that you guys find that aren't on Tracker, you can always go in and create custom fields to leverage any of these. So we're going to tag this to the candidate. We're going to pick it as a yes/no, and we're going to make it visible as well. So this is an example of another type of field where we can go in now. I'm going to go right back into our Sean Thomas record. And now we've built two custom fields. So we have our open to relocation, yes, no, and then we have our ranking. So one of the things, the custom fields are just going to be alphabetical. So they are going to list out alphabetically, but one tip that you can do if you want them to be in a specific order is when you're building those fields out, you can rename them here. So if I wanted our ranking one to be first, and it's actually the letter R, you can put a number value in front of it, and you can number or you can letter your custom fields if you want them to have a certain fixed numerical value. If you do that, if I go back in and look at my custom fields, you can see that now I can have them be in the specific format that I want. So that's just one best practice if you do want to put a specific order to the custom fields. So that's how you can populate those custom fields on the system. Now, if you have one and you want to delete it, it's as easy as going back into that custom field section and deleting that field just by clicking on it, hitting the trash can, and it would get rid of that. It would dump all the data inside of that field, so just be careful if you are removing that field from the system. So next, we'll take a look at managing and creating the custom field lists. So in this case, if you are using those lists on the system, you can go in and you can always maintain it by adding or removing it. So let's say the ranking field, you actually wanted to add another one in. I could go into this list and I could add another value in and hit save and close, and it would reorder that field. So you can go in and change or add any additional fields. So another option for this one that you may run into is, let's say for the companies, you're wanting to add a custom field and you're wanting to track, what companies they have worked with. You could go in and you could build a list and you could call this competitors. And you could say company A, company B, company C. You could add that list in. You could also add a custom field in to either the contact or the company record, if this is something that you're wanting to track of what competitors they're working with. You could go in and have this one be tied to a company record. It could be a multi-list, and then you could say, I want to tag it to our competitors field. This is another type of custom field you could build, but this is where you could go in, and as you're looking at your companies or prospecting into your companies, you would be able to go in and look at those custom fields, and you could say, we know that they're working with competitor C and competitor A, and you could build out the different companies they're partnering with. So that's another type of field you could build. With that type of field, you can always go in and maintain that list by adding to it, where if there's a brand new company that you bump into that people are working with, you could go into that competitors list and we could type in new company, and it would add into that drop-down list. So that's how you can manage and create lists that can be tagged to custom fields. Now the next thing we'll take a look at in that customization section is going to be the layout designer. Now the layout designer is where in Tracker you can go in and you can pick the different layouts on the system. So the recruiter layout is the one that's canned out of the box that you have access to. In this recruiter layout, you can go in and pick the different record screens you have access to. So for instance, if you want to change the candidate record, you can go into the candidate record and you can move the blocks of data up and down. So let's say the notes field is really important for you and you actually want that notes field to be on the very main tab. You can take that notes section and you can move it next to activities if I wanted it to be right next to activities. If I hit save, it would update that in real time and it would move that block of info around. Now the other thing you can do is you can also go in and you can move the entire blocks of data up and down. So if I wanted the history and activities section to be one more up, I can move it up there, and it would be right in between profile and salary and internal notes. So that is another option that you would have to customize the layout. Now, if there's a piece of information that you're not using, you can take that and you would be able to take something and drag it over into the record blocks available section. And this is going to be the different record blocks that you have access to, but you're not currently using. So in here, the layout can be customized. So if I hit Save Layout and go right back into a candidate record and look at Sean Thomas, if we go down to our activities block, this is where we can now see that our activities and our notes are right next to each other. So one important thing to note, so what you can move is going to be from the bold lettering all the way down to the next block of data. So you can't move an individual field around, but you can move the entire block. And you can also create new blocks on the left-hand side. So the layout designer is per user group. So if you wanted to build additional layouts and have them split out across the team, the other thing you can do is you can build a new layout. The one thing you'll notice is you can clone or make that layout based off of another one. So if I wanted to base it off of the recruiter layout, I could go in here and I could call this junior recruiter. If you wanted to build a different layout for them, you could do that. And as you're looking at that junior recruiter view, you could go in and we could say inside of the candidate page, there's certain things I want to remove. You know, we may not want them to have access to the timesheet and expense section if that's not something they're going to do. So you could take that block, you could remove the 3 different items, you could hit Save Layout, and then that timesheet and expense section itself, you could hit the pencil and we could delete that tab entirely. So now we're cleaning up and kind of minimizing the view that they would have access to. So that is how you can use the layout designer to tweak or have different views based off of different levels of access or different groups within the team. And cloning that will make it really easy to work within the same layout and not have to start over from scratch. So the next piece we'll look at in customization is mandatory fields. So in the mandatory fields section, this is where you can go in and any of the fields on the system for company, contact, leads, campaigns, jobs, and candidates, you can click on these to make them mandatory so that a record will not be able to be saved or created unless these fields are entered. So for instance, in a candidate record, let's say we want to force the mobile phone. And we also want to force email and candidate owner to be updated, as well as the source or the where did you hear. So if I go in and select those and hit save, what will happen is if I go into a candidate record on the system, and these haven't been mandatory fields yet, but if I was to try to make a save to this record, you would see that Tracker would pop up a notification letting you know that mandatory fields need to be created. So now, where did you hear is a mandatory field. You would see that this one is red. I would need to select that, update it, hit Save Changes, and it would enter that in. So that's where you can make different fields mandatory within a record by going into Tools and going into that mandatory field section. Now, if you wanted to remove any of those after you've selected them, all you would have to do is go in and uncheck that information. So if you wanted to change or remove one of those, you could just untick the box and it would make it a non-mandatory field. That goes over the customization lesson, lesson number 4 in TrackerRMS.